It was actually early June at the time I started to write this. With problems of similar scale before, I kept my thoughts and feelings private, and with prior ignorance, I would have approached those topics blinded. It's as if I could hear chatter and observe actions on a mainland, but I was on my own quiet island. But with my country's recent status, it's very hard to stay silent. I just find it so ironic part of our name is the word united, because from sea to shining sea, it often seems just so divided. Sure, when ignoring the past, some of today's issues might not be called a crisis, but it's insane considering some haven't changed since our founders did paper signings. And I'm sure everyone's forefathers hoped we'd all be more enlightened and be able to share knowledge and perspectives without sacrificing kindness. But there's so much going on at the moment that's undoubtedly unrighteous, and even with my white privilege, I can't help but feel frightened, with brutal violence coming from riots and others looting at will like pirates. A south suburb of Chicago is where I spend some time residing, so my fear now hits different on these summer nights when I hear approaching sirens. Some days I'll go to my family's house and they'll have on cable TV, with news stations replaying never-ending negativity. I see an unbalanced society, a one-sided hierarchy. There's tens of millions who bottom feed while only a few can be elite. I inevitably turn to a different screen with today's technology. It's either my phone or PC and open my social media feed. Beyond goofy memes, contentious tweets, and expressive immaturity, I see the exact same disparity that's displayed on cable news TV. And in times of extreme uncertainty like these, I think about my nation's history and what previous citizens did before they became deceased. Regardless of their values and other personal beliefs, they turn to Washington, D.C. looking for guidance from those who lead. But since most politicians have now been corrupt for 4 decades at the least, I honestly don't care about our current president's lack of competencies. You could be a big tool and still have a big heart, and right now the latter is what this country needs. In fact, your number one intention should be to keep American minds at peace, especially in 2020 with continuous streams of tragedies. A major one had occurred the last week of January. In other years, I wouldn't have to say it for you all to be reminded, but there was this helicopter crash in Calabasas that took us all by surprise, and of course, one death is too many, but this time it wasn't just the pilot. 8 more people lost their lives, including Kobe and Gianna Bryant. For those two I just named, Vanessa was the wife and mother, respectively. Her emotional pain must be excruciating and unfathomably unique, and that specific grief is probably still there even when her tears cease. But less than a month later, she was able to give a long, amazing speech for her family's memory, and it showcased her bravery when she was able to do so and keep her composure on live national TV. But at the same time, a new disease from China began to spread internationally. It hit Italy, Spain, Brazil, American cities, and pretty much everywhere else in between. Back in February, especially, COVID's traits were a mystery. We spent half a year adapting our lives now and still haven't finished the vaccine. And that adapting began in March before the official start of spring. State of emergencies were declared and businesses were closing. It's crazy how one of the top news stories changed because it went from the sports world mourning to store item hoarding. Many people were panicking on behalf of their families and salvaging store shelves in fear they could soon be obsolete. In moderation for certain cases, I showed some of those people sympathy, but who not to those who resold these essential items for $100 a piece. So stay-at-home orders were enacted and began immediately, and people were told to go into their towns only for necessities. A proper mask was asked to be worn covering both nose and mouth. Going to indoor public places without it mostly wasn't allowed. Students turned off early morning alarms and started online classes. Live sports events were canceled, including the annual March Madness. Artists couldn't perform their work unless it was done remotely. It was a nightmare for small business owners in the transportation industry. Traveling was very restricted. Musicians stopped touring. It's funny how before society rarely used the term quarantine. The stock market crashed like it was hit by a tidal wave, and even if you felt fine, you were still advised to isolate. As April came to an end, adjustments were in full effect. Over 100 million Americans received their stimulus checks. Personally, I care most about the victims of COVID sickness, plus their loved ones, minority groups, and parents with little kids. And it was a breath of fresh air for me to see essential workers finally get overdue respect. But soon a man in distress would unrightfully not get a chance for more breaths. The tragedy I'm referencing took place at the end of May. I hope the USA would be more tame on its national holiday, Memorial Day. Minneapolis was the place. George Floyd was his name, and by paying with a bill that was fake, he was ultimately sent to his grave. The way law enforcement handled the situation was such an awful mess. This assault was all their fault and it involved zero common sense. George wasn't resisting arrest, he just wanted them to accommodate, but the impulsive decisions those officers made simply put him in more pain. With George handcuffed, abrupt force was the officers' next mission. They had him pinned face down on the ground for almost 8 minutes. For each second